And one of the most unique sauna experiences I've ever had was going to Finland and getting into this little rowboat with a Finnish man and him rowing my wife out and leaving us on a raft to sauna and swim and sauna and swim right on the Baltic. And it was just magic. I don't even separate hot and cold in terms of cold plunge and hot sauna. I, that's in the word sauna for me. Sauna as a verb and a ritual and a practice, it includes some kind of cooling down, and you're sort of coming into a sacred space that has the potential to transform you, not just give you a little bit of a bump in your immune system and your heart being a little healthier that week.
Guess who's coming to sauna? Hekilunta. Guess who's coming to sauna? Hekilunta.
Hello all, I'm Eero with the Upper Bench, and we have a great show for you guys today. Sam, what's going on with you?
Oh, just might sound a little froggy today. I'm getting over a cold here, but nothing a good steam isn't going to cure later. It's a little chilly down here now in South Carolina, about 50, 60 degrees, but I'm sure Risto, it might be a little chillier where you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually warm in Minnesota for this time of year. I think we might be above 40 today.
Oh, wow.
So I've been cold plunging every morning, which is awesome. Um, I don't even have to break through the ice every morning. So I'm super thankful for that. And then we're working on our family sauna podcast, the Sauna Trail. And so that should be live by the time this episode's live. So I'm gonna shamelessly plug it and say everyone go check out our story. And if you want to see me in my birthday suit, maybe there'll be some episodes like that. So maybe you want to avoid it. But
Hey, maybe that'll be good content for the Patreons
yeah, our patrons. I'll put that up on our Patreon. But I'm excited today to have my friend Justin. Juntunen, that's the English pronunciation, but I always hear like our Finnish friends say Juntunen.
Yeah, so which one do you use actually?
Just I'm any way that people want to pronounce it, I'm not going to sort of reprimand anybody, but Juntonen in the Finnish and Juntonen in the English. But I am just so honored to be with you guys today. Love the work you're doing. Have known all of you guys over the years, and just am a big fan of what you guys are doing, continuing to share the culture around sauna. And I'm doing that here, based out of Duluth, Minnesota. So we probably have a few chapters and things to talk about today. There's a lot going on. So Chris, take us there. What are we talking about today?
Well, clearly your last name is Finnish. Anytime I hear, if you get into Finnish culture, you learn the NNs. That's probably a Finnish person.
That's
Do you know what your last name means? I forget if I've ever asked you this question.
Yeah, there's, my family, I'm one of those immigrant families, 100 plus years ago, came across the Atlantic, and from this little tiny town in Finland right on the Russian border, Suomussalmi, famous for one of the battles in the Winter War.
I know that
My
extremely well. Yeah.
Yeah, my family left there prior to, and so I've been somebody who, and my last name Jontonen is sort of very prominent in that part of the country. You got to go through the genealogical research. That part is very specific. You have a lot of Jontonens there. And it means something around sort of sandy beach or cove or something like that. They're sort of related to sort of a lot of those Finnish names were related to landforms, trees, lakes. The names were built out of the environment, which I think is also really beautiful and very Finnish. Of there's always been a connection to place, and so much of sort of my work and what I'm up to, like it's actually deeply connected to where I am and the community I'm in. And we're going to probably deep dive a whole lot into sauna around that. But for me, like my life is oriented around actually the flourishing of the city that I'm in, Duluth, Minnesota, our land, our water, our trees, our people. And that's through sauna in a whole bunch of different ways. But to me, it's just a project that's based on location and place, not unlike many Finnish last names, I think.
Let
Eero.
me let me cut here. I'm sorry, because I actually Googled that. That Juntu does not mean anything to me. I have to admit, I'm such a, I don't know, um, like recent Finn, so to speak. But it means a forest path, a forest walkway. Juntu means. I did not know that, but like my last name is Kilpi, and there's also many Kilpinens out there. But that's a different story. But anyway, interesting, very interesting, awesome.
And
And
so, yeah,
go
so
ahead.
you run a sauna company in Duluth, and that's how we first met. Was I still remember our first conversation. I was in Michigan. I heard you on Glenn's Sauna podcast as you were describing your plans for a sauna business in Duluth, and I was like, "Oh, I like his vision. I have to connect with this Justin guy." And so what are you guys doing in Duluth right now?
Yeah, I'm the CEO and founder of Cedar and Stone Nordic Sauna. We're just a stress relief company, you guys. We just help people destroy stress, live better, uh, and do that through sauna. And I say it that way. I know I'm preaching to the choir right now. All you guys love sauna. All the listeners here, if you're listening to the Upper Bench podcast, you probably have some experience with sauna. I start with stress because my goal is actually getting sauna to more people who didn't grow up like me with this sort of cultural gift that was handed to them. It's a little like if you ever sort of know people who have like great homemade family recipes or cultural dishes, right? And you're like, oh, I want the home cooked meal because so and so's grandma makes an amazing, insert that. I always felt like I had the privilege in my life of great sauna, and I often saw and introduced people to that. And then I became a business owner to introduce more people to that. And we do that in a number of different ways. We have a number of public saunas, both here in Duluth and Minneapolis, that are open to the public, that people book sessions for. You can come jump in the water with us in Lake Superior. We have a new floating sauna we're probably going to talk about at some point. Uh, and then also, we build and construct and design saunas and ship them all over North America. So we're sort of both an experiential company as well as a design and manufacturing company around sauna, and sort of committed to building sustainable structures, and really, really sort of good, high quality. So if we want to geek out about construction while we're here, that's sort of an area I'm living in all the time. And then retail product, we're selling components and we're training entrepreneurs. So those are the four areas. We actually are training a lot of folks. This might be good listener stuff, who are sort of seeing sauna as more than a pastime and a hobby. They're starting to look at it as a business. We have a program where people join us for about 6 months and we work with them and train them on launching in their area. And that's everything from big bathhouses to small mobile saunas and everything in between. And so it's been really fun. I'm just trying to champion quality sauna and help people relieve stress. And over the next 10 years, my goal is to host 1 million people for sauna, because we deserve more resilient lives. And you guys already know that. My goal is to get it to 1 million more people. And with every month, we're getting there. We're chipping away at that big, big, big number.
Where are you at? Where are you at right now?
Well, we're gonna hit 5,000 for sure for the year in our locations and spaces. That number is only growing. We've doubled our capacity in Duluth over the last year. We've opened a space in Minneapolis. And then we get to count a whole bunch of things, right? Like if we send a sauna to a client's home, personal, we're going to count them and the people they host. When we train an entrepreneur and they open a business, we're going to get to count them. So, the tentacles go out deep and wide, and the curve is a parabola. It's like going to get higher and higher as the years go on. We're only a year or so into that clarity around the vision statement. But yeah, the next 10 years, I really think we're going to do it. The US and North America deserves to experience the best quality sauna. And the cool thing is it's really taking off now. People are starting to ask questions about quality and experience, not just why is it healthy for me? So there's a lot to say in there. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like compounding sauna interest.
totally. Yep. Yep.
So let's get into like what your growing up was like. So Eero can relate to you. He was just telling us before we started the call, he's a little jealous of Sam and I because he never has that memory of the first sauna experience of like as an adult, experiencing that steam. Whereas Sam and I were, relatively newcomers. But you grew up with sauna. What was that like? What are some of the most memorable saunas in your experience? You know, how did that work with the kids and the adults sauning together? Family sauna is not a well-known concept in the broader American world.
Yeah, growing up in a small Finnish and American community here in Minnesota, Esko, Minnesota, right? 20 minutes down the road from Duluth. Um, when immigrants moved here, they sort of brought with all the cultural gifts, and a lot of the Finnish communities became very connected because at the time, in terms of all the immigrants coming over, they were some of the sort of lowest on the socioeconomic ladder. And here in the upper Midwest, they got the worst jobs in the mines and the mills and the docks. And Duluth, Minnesota was kind of a launching point for them. And we can kind of talk a lot more about Duluth and the immigrant history there, but why I bring it up is because I grew up in this town that was very sort of bought into Finnish cultural history. There's Finnish road names on every sign. My family had a farm, a dairy farm at the end of Juntunen Road, and there was the sauna there. And for me growing up, I don't have that memory like Eero of my first sauna because I was probably 3 months old. I was probably a little baby, and they brought me in to warm up and wash, and I literally sort of grew up in the sauna. And for me, when I think about sauna in terms of my family, I think about it a lot like a dinner table because it's one of those spaces where we would gather. And many times people only have the to gather around meals. For me, it's we also had the sauna. That was a gathering point, whether that was with grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and then at multiple different places. That was at grandma and grandpa's house in the basement. That was at the cabin by the lake every single summer, being in there with all my cousins and going and jumping in the lake. That was in every home that we had as a kid growing up. It wasn't if there was going to be a sauna, it was when was it going to be built. So I remember building my first sauna with my dad when I was just 3 years old. And then at every cabin, at every home after, it was always sort of a part of the fabric of our family. And so what sometimes happens when that's true is you take it for granted. It's the fish in water syndrome, right? Like you didn't know how good you had it. And only until I sort of went out to do university work and then moved out east for a while, like sort of went a few other places, did I realize how maybe unique that was in my family. Again, because I grew up in this little small Finnish community where that was very normal. Um, and so I think those are some of the contours, Chris, around what that meant for me and what it was like in my family. My grandfather, I do want to one little story on that. My grandfather, he was the town barber. Now, barbers are good if they can cut an okay haircut, but they know how to tell stories and they know how to listen well. Like that's a good barber is they can sort of listen and tell a good story. So I like to follow after Grandpa Rod Juntunen. He was the town barber, and he really in so many ways, sort of introduced me to sauna and brought that into our family and kept that tradition alive. He's so proud of what we're doing as a business. But I remember him telling these stories of being on the farm growing up. And I think it's a good picture of what we're talking about today. He would say, even as a little boy, he would, at the end of the day, try to run to be in the sauna with the guys from the farm. And he would handle the heat in there because the sauna is where the stories are told. And he wanted to be there for those stories. He wanted to hear them and know them. And he wanted to be in the presence of those people. And so, like the sauna being the dinner table, the spot where we connect and converse, I think in Finnish American communities, in Finnish communities, the sauna is the space where the stories are told. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that communal understanding of sauna does cut against the grain of sort of this Americanized, single person, meditative, only an individual perspective, because again, in the US, we are very much individuals, right? And independent. And those are sort of cultural virtues. I think what we're seeing now in the 21st century is there's just this hunger and desire for community, for connection, for getting away from the sort of isolationist world we're in and the online spaces, even though these ones are good, like we're doing now. But getting into spaces where you're seen and known and you feel good, and heck, there's good stories being told, that's a remedy for right now. That's a balm on the sort of modern, stressed out, digitized world that we're in. So I'm preaching a little bit, but that's where I grew up. That's how it is, and I think, man, it's like now we're in this world where we get to give that to more people.
So how do we measure story shock proteins then?
Oh yeah, yeah. How do we measure that? Oh, that is the qualitative research, not the quantitative, not the metabolic science, which, a couple of my thoughts there are like, I am so glad this comes back to family history. The scientific knowledge is catching up to the cultural knowledge. The cultural knowledge is, hey, in northern communities and Nordic communities, we've known the sauna is a place for health. It's a place for good. I was sort of told, like, if you're starting to feel sick, go take a sauna. Like, that is what you need to go do. Um, Now we actually have medical data to back that up. So, like, I want to fan the flames of medical research that is helping new people discover it. And I think the sauna is much more than a protocol. And I think there is a risk of taking this and turning it into some kind of wellness fad or regimen or protocol that really does distill too much out of the experience of sauna. The
Oh yeah.
social, the emotional, the spiritual components that sort of are found in sauna can't be found in 11 minutes in the cold and 58 minutes in the heat, which is the Soberg Institute principle. Like, and I love what Suzanne is doing for her research, and it's not all of it. And so my goal is to keep those cultural voices front and center, to keep sort of design, beauty, and environmental sustainability front and center. And yeah, let's get more people. Let's talk about the health and wellness benefits, but it should be done with all those other things there.
Exactly, exactly. Let me just chime in a little. It's kind of interesting because what you're speaking, it reminds me that our family moved to New York close to 26 years ago, and I had three issues, huge issues of moving to New. I live in New York, so one was how do I manage with the crowds? That's kind of still like the verdict is out there because it's like this Christmas season, you go to Fifth Avenue or whatever, it's packed with tourists or whatever. The other one was sailing. I used to do active sailing back home, and the third one was sauna. So it's like the odds were on my side because after 5 weeks of living here, I was out on Long Island Sound sailing, and after 2 months of moving here, I was at the Banya. We don't, New York is this is an upcoming sauna scene, but it's like it's ethnic Banyas have been ruling. But anyway, so it was like all these obstacles that I had that I thought I had were like downplayed because I just got into the thing like right away, and lucky enough I'm not sauna bathing closely as much as I was in Finland for the first 39 years of my life, but I'm getting there, and that's awesome. And we are talking about the good stuff, and like you said, health benefits is one thing, but to understand the wholesome, the everything of sauna, that's still in the works, big time.
So you mentioned Duluth a little bit. Let's get into that. Unless Sam or Eero, you have any more questions about Justin's growing up with sauna. I could probably spend like 4 hours just talking to him about that.
I'm loving the conversation so far, Justin. When you talked about, I'm sure in getting, those carpentry experiences with your father, and family members building your first sauna, those are experiences I'm sure that laid the groundwork for, especially what you're doing today. Are you still swinging a hammer today? And are you still, out there, putting these things together?
Yeah, the difficulty in business is if you want it to grow, you have to give other people the fun jobs, to be quite honest. Like I wish I'd be still hosting people for sauna and starting the fire in the morning for a day's worth of sauna guests. I wish I'd be spending some more time pounding nails and carving wood and making sawdust. But right now, our company has grown, and so the goal there is continue to help support our local economy, to create jobs, to work with even better carpenters and designers than me. And so yeah, my day-to-day doesn't look like that anymore, Sam. It's we have about 40 people on the payroll right now, which is really amazing. So we have a bunch of full-time, super great craftsmen in the shop that do things faster and better than I do. I'm always down there making sure things still look good and doing a little bit of quality control and all that. And I still get to spend some time on, deliveries, working with clients or being there once it's finally done. That's super rewarding. Getting to sort of help somebody envision a sauna for their home for us is a very relational process. We're not selling barrel saunas at Costco. Here's the thing. Go ahead, slap it together. We are really going to either design a thing from the ground up for you, or we're going to say, hey, here's some standardized models that we really love, that we've designed, that are beautiful, that are quality. And we'd like to work with you on which one fits your family best. And so for me, I'm often in sort of a supportive leadership role with our team members. I'm often working a lot with our sales and our clients. And I'm doing a lot of marketing and storytelling work. For me as a CEO, my sort of sweet spot is being the evangelist, is teaching people about sauna, to being out in front, to talking about it and saying, hey, look what we're up to today. Look at, we're craning a floating sauna into the harbor. Come watch. Those are things that I sort of naturally do as a communicator. I think I got that from Grandpa Rod. I'm a little bit of the storyteller. And so that's what my life looks like a lot, Sam, is doing that. But starting a business is not for the faint of heart. It's very full, very hard work, but super rewarding at the end. It's kind of like parenting in that way. Like, it's hard work, and there are days where you're pulling your hair out, and there are days where you're so proud and it's bringing you to tears. When I sat in our floating sauna for the first time, my tear ducts got a little leaky, because I had been dreaming up that experience for 12 years since I had been on a floating sauna floating on the Baltic in Finland. And so, yeah, I'm pretty bought in. I know I'm going to be doing this for the next few decades of my life. And it's really, really fun. But today I'm not swinging too many hammers.
The question that I have for you is one of the many, is that the North American Sauna Society was started 20 years back. And there was not a whole lot of noise of real saunas back in the day when we started. And I always felt that my dear friends here, Risto and Sam, have been like criticizing me of that. But I've always felt, and I still kind of feel, that the Finnish folks, i.e. me, an immigrant from Finland here, and you guys from Midwest, we didn't make a lot of noise back in the day about the real thing, and things got a little bit sidetracked, I feel. The Chinese infrared rooms started getting in, and sort of like the whole thing got a little blurred. Now it's a different ball game, we all know. But do you feel, kind of stupid question, but do you feel that we are to blame here, that we didn't stand up and say that, come on, time out, this is not a sauna that we should be talking about?
No, I'm not going to pass blame on anybody. I would say, here's my take on what you're describing. Finnish folks came over, whether 100 years ago, like my family, or 20 years ago, like you, Eero, and they came over with a cultural gift. And Finnish people are not boastful people. Finnish people are focused on sort of supporting their own. They don't, there's all the sort of jokes and memes around sort of the boastful Finn doesn't exist, right? All those kinds of things. And so the humility of the Finnish culture provided this thing where they weren't going to sell it. And even more so in some of these small Finnish American communities, it was protected, right? Because they came over, they had the hardest jobs in the mines, mills, and the docks. Like I said, we're going to get to, this is what we're going to get to for Duluth here, Risto, by the way. Like, that's what was happening in Duluth. If you are an immigrant and you're oppressed in some ways, you are going to guard the treasures, the cultural treasures, especially that you have. So most of the time in communities like me, sauna is it's a precious commodity. It's something that's protected. It's not something that's sort of given away freely and shared a lot. And how that comes up most of the time, you know, a good Finnish preservationist, cultural preservationist, when they correct you on pronunciation of that word, right? You hear that happens all the time in my family and in places up in the upper Midwest here. People say, that's not a sauna, it's a sauna. Say it correctly. And I get their intention. They're trying to protect that thing and keep it, like you were talking about, Eero, quality. They're trying to keep it. But guess what? America is really good at the McDonald'sification of everything. America's really, really good at the cheap and convenient knockoff of good things. And so by no means am I going to blame any Finn who came across and went up against American culture, and now American culture has watered it down and put in infrared cabins and said, this is a sauna, look. Right? That's just the American culture or the West or capitalism doing its thing. That is different than this cultural preservationism. My take on it is I'm never going to correct people over the pronunciation. I know pronunciation's big for a lot of people. I will say it like my grandfather said it when he came over across the Atlantic, the sauna. But I actually want people to experience sauna before they pronounce it correctly. Because I don't think anybody's going to change their mind for being reprimanded of you're saying it the wrong way if you have no cultural context for it. It's like eating a quesadilla for the first time and being like, what's in this? I don't know what I'm eating right now. This is pretty tasty. There's a salsa and things going on. And then you learn it's quesadilla, right? Like,
Don't let Risto start this talk. You know, it's like he's like waiting to say something about quesadillas here.
No, I'm on the same page with Justin. You know, it is. I would rather people pronounce it wrong and get it right. You know, the
yeah.
the mispronunciation is mostly in the practice, not the word. You know, and focusing on really, you know, getting that practice to be really robust and not overly simplified. You mentioned the McDonald's. You know, we get it as simple as we can, as cheap as we can, and then we just mass produce it. Um, that is what happened with sauna.
Yep, that absolutely is. That's the goal then to me is instead of racing to the bottom and making the cheapest, most convenient sauna that could exist, I'm sort of less interested in that as a project. I'm more interested in beauty and quality and tradition and how do we create the thing that's closest to the pinnacle? Because there's also people who want that. And increasingly, I would say there's more and more people who want that as sauna has been introduced and as the sort of gateway is opening here in North America. We're having a bit of a resurgence and people are discovering it largely through the health benefits. But they're starting, it's a lot like maybe when craft beer happened 15 years ago. Craft beer was this process of people tasting something that they had never tasted before and learning about the ingredients. I didn't know anything about how to brew beer before 10, 15 years ago when I went to a local brewery and I tasted something that I had never tasted. Beer became a culinary experience.
Mhm.
And this for me is growing up in a home where there was actually like in my family's a lot of alcoholism. Alcohol never turned into anything good in my family. And then I had this like transformative experience where I saw people talking about beer like it was food and culinary and connected. That's what's happening for sauna right now. It's going from this torture test method, right? People, a lot of Americans, all they know is like you go in the sauna to make weight for wrestling, or you go and you're sort of challenging yourself. It's another piece of workout equipment for a lot of people. So much so that they put workout equipment in the sauna. They put the bike in there and they try to over exercise themselves. To me, sauna has never been about challenge. It's been about enjoyment. It's been a way, yes, through the sort of heat, and sometimes that is difficult, or the cold, and sometimes that is challenging. But my memory and experience of it is not one of endure, it's one of enjoy. And I think that's the thing that I want to introduce people to, is how do we enjoy it to its highest quality? And that includes jumping through a hole in the ice, and that includes caring about the wood that's on the walls and the thermal mass in the stove, and having conversations with people about it might make sense to have a wood-fired stove because that process is so lovely. Or what if you just used it 10 times more because there was a little bit of an easy button to press for an electric sauna? Like, then that's probably a better decision for you. So um, I'm really interested in that. Like, how do we be quality driven, aspirational in those ways? And there will always in America be a cheap knockoff. Don't you worry. America will do that. Um, but there will always be people I think also are interested in the best, and more so now in the US.
Well, and we do have some of that in our culture. It's not like just McDonald's. You know,
Yeah.
people still buy Mercedes or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever the fancy car is. There is an aspirational, we do recognize quality. You know, quality is compelling. Like once you experience that, you know, once you experience like I don't know what a great hamburger is these days, Shake Shack or something, you know it's better than McDonald's, you know. You still might try McDonald's every now and again, but quality can ruin that poor experience for you.
Yeah, I am in the habit of ruining people's experience of sauna because now they've been given the good thing, and it's tough to go back, right? And so people talk a lot with me about infrared, or, the gym, or I'm like, you know what? If it makes sense for you and your budget to have a barrel sauna in the backyard, go for it, because that's better than nothing. But also be aware that there's some maybe more beautiful options, or more unique, or more quality options for how to sauna and how that might impact your life. Um, and so try those out too, right? Be a part of the sort of rising sauna culture that's happening here in the US.
Let's talk about Duluth a bit. In our sauna adventures, our family sauna adventures, we ended up going to Duluth. I'm trying to remember if the first time it maybe was to meet you, but and this was just when you guys were getting started. I can't remember where we were with the COVID situation, but
In the
in
heart of it. We were in the heart of it, Chris. Yeah.
yeah, and but in Duluth, there really wasn't much. There is a public sauna in Duluth called, ironically called is it called Family Sauna or something?
Yeah, the Duluth Family Sauna.
And it's not for those of, you know, our listeners, if you're like, "Oh, I'll take my family there." You shouldn't. I think it's more, some of it's more adult uh gauged. I mean, they do have saunas there from what I've heard, but it's definitely not like a family friendly sauna. And so your public sauna was kind of like that first one that had been like noticeable, recognizable, that you could point to in the public realm for I don't know how long, which is kind of a weird thing for Duluth. You know, we had a conversation about this where you were saying, you know, making the case for Duluth being the sauna capital. And in my head, I'm like, how could that be? There's really not many saunas in Duluth. So what's the history of the sauna in Duluth? What's the case for Duluth being the sauna capital? And then, you know, what's the history and where are we going with that?
Yeah, so I mean, to gauge it properly, I've never said Duluth's the sauna capital of the world, because we all know
US. Yeah.
Finland's going to take that,
Yeah,
and
sure.
Tampere has grabbed it as part of their marketing and tourism as the sauna capital. But I would say if you look historically at the North America, I think Duluth makes a pretty captivating case for the sauna capital of North America. And here's why. Because 100 years ago, Duluth had upwards of 8 to 10 public saunas in just about every neighborhood. And that was because of the sort of significant waves of Finnish immigration at the time. Many of those were serving those immigrants who are in town, who are just arriving there off the boat for the first time. And many of those over the course of those late 1800s, early 1900s did just like every other sort of area of American life. It got convenient and it went in homes, right? So instead of the public sauna and it in the public sphere, though some of them persisted, sauna became like the kitchen, fairly convenient. They got an electric stove and then the sauna went in the basement.
Well,
So
and yeah, and Duluth had unique stoves, not just electric, right?
totally. So we were in this part of the country where those immigrants were then getting enough money to then go buy the farm or buy the house or eventually buy the cabin. And so now late 1900s when I was growing up, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, right? What you found was people knew sauna based on my friend has one at the lake. It was a private lakeside experience or somebody has one. So Duluth per capita probably has more saunas per home inside the home or in the backyard than almost anywhere else. And 100 years ago, we had some of the most public saunas. We are a part of and seeing a huge resurgence of that, both here and also in Finland, right? That same trajectory was true in Finland, where now more and more public saunas are being opened again. More and more people are desiring that.
Yes.
When I think about Duluth's history there, it is one of why it is the capital. It's a cultural, historical capital where we have a lot of history in those years. I will show you guys when you come pictures from the Duluth Evening Herald from 1914 promoting saunas and sauna open, public sauna for the masses in old newspapers. Now, I will admit, we're a town of right around 100,000 people on the Great Lakes. We're not New York City, where Eero is. We're not some of these bigger places where, sure, there was maybe more people broadly, and you have some banyas and bathhouses that have persisted. But Duluth has a really interesting spot because I think also as we define sauna as a Finnish experience and cultural gift, um, I would say that's part of why I'm very specific about that as the sauna capital, not the thermic bathing capital, right? There were plenty more hammams in other places and banyas and bathhouses. And you're right, one of those has persisted, the Duluth family sauna. It's continued. Our business has sort of grown and continued. There's been a number of others over the last 4 or 5 years that have begun to pop up, from builders to rentals to mobile spaces to tents. Like there's a burgeoning culture. Minnesota is probably one of the most mature sauna markets in the US because it's sort of in the water here. And if I can make one more case for Duluth, we dibsed it first. I'm sorry. We got the mayor to write us a letter to say this is sauna capital. We're doing it. We're saying it to the world. Other people are saying it back. Sorry you didn't get there sooner. Every other city that has a stake on this, and Western, Northern Michigan, other places. But we've had fun sort of talking about that and introducing people to the culture, the history, and the experience again and again right out of Duluth here. Plus, we got the best cold water in just about anywhere in North America with Lake Superior. Even in the heart of summer, oof, that water is still nice and fresh and cold.
Because even in the summer, doesn't the water only get to 40 degrees?
Yeah, there's something, it really depends on where the wind is blowing. There can be 90-degree August days, and if the wind is blowing out, you get the cold water from underneath kind of coming, the warm water gets pushed away, you get the cold water from underneath, and it's more psychologically difficult, in my opinion, to cold plunge in Lake Superior when it's warm out than when there's snow and ice everywhere, because you know what you're getting into in the winter. And in the summer, it's so drastically different when you're on a sandy beach and the water is still 45 degrees. It's just such a shock to the system.
Well, and for our listeners, who maybe are big cold plunge geeks, and they maybe have a tub like we do in our backyard, if I could just make the sales pitch for cold plunging in Superior, it's amazing. You can have multiple people in at the same time. You're not confined in this small space. It's the acme of cold plunges.
Yeah, there's something about natural water that makes a whole lot of things easier around that. And for some, of course, having the tub in the backyard is amazing, right? It's convenient, it's easy. But I do encourage people to get into natural cold water, whether it's the river, the mountain stream, the cold lake or pond. And some of these big lakes, like Lake Superior, there's just something special about being on big water and cold water. It's a lot like sort of plunging into the Baltic. You know, there's a soul to it. There's a spirituality to sort of seeing how small you are in the face of big, vast water where you can't see the shoreline on the other side.
We've been doing this the upper bench for a year now, a little over a year, and there are a couple of words that come repeat them like over every episode. It's the nature and community, nature and community, and that's like that. Those are the words that we have to keep in our back of our minds, because you don't necessarily have the community, you don't necessarily have the nature, but you have to understand that when you're doing the sauna, that those are there somewhere and they're basic ingredients of that sauna experience. So Justin, I have a question for you. So what's your take on, even though you touched that a little bit already, but so what's your take on the other forms of thermotherapy? The steam showers and the steam rooms and the infrareds. And so how do you see those, where you come along into the game?
Yeah, I want to be really humble because I think humans have found ways for heat and cold to be healthy for us in so many cultures. Now, I'm proud of my heritage, my bloodline, my last name. That's one of those Finnish last names with too many vowels, right? I love Finnish sauna because I know it the best and I've grown up with it. But if we are honest, this is the spot where us Finns need to be a little more humble, and especially us Finnish Americans need to be humble. Is sauna is one of the many thermic bathing traditions around the world. So we can take a cursory glance and say Native American sweat lodge, Central American temescal, Russian banya, Turkish hammam, Korean jjinjingbam. We could go on and on and on and say, look, humans, this is a deeply human act to put ourselves in heat. This is a deeply human act to put ourselves in cold. The Roman baths, y'all, 2,000 years ago, were putting people in different temperatures of water because they found that it was healthy for the society. It was healthy for people. It was healthy for our bodies and our minds and our souls and our communities to do that. We are now in the modern age where information is just always at our fingertips. I think sauna is a beautiful expression of that, but never will I ever say it's the only one or the best one, because I think actually we should be more aware that this is a human kind of element, a human thermal bathing, thermic bathing, bathing culture broadly is what sort of people should be interested in and learn about. But you mentioned something there, Eero. You said steam shower, right?
Mhm.
Let's get into that. The steam shower is in my opinion, the sort of like commodified version of Turkish hammam,
Mhm.
right? So like capitalism has taken these cultural virtues and said, okay, how do we turn it into a product? And the way that that happens in the States is you go into a steam shower and you don't really know, they're not going to tell you the sort of cultural background of the steam shower unless you do your homework. So what I'm more interested in is people learning in whatever type of thermic bathing that they've been interested in, that kind of cultural background and history, or else you run the risk of cultural appropriation. I work a lot with entrepreneurs who are thinking about these things and they're asking me, what is Finnish sauna and can I even introduce people to good Finnish sauna without having a Finnish last name or a background? And I would say there's for sure ways to do it well and there's for sure ways to do it poorly. It's very easy to take a cultural thing and slap your name on it or do a thing and say, yep, here you go. It's actually harder to not culturally appropriate, to learn the history, to teach the history, to understand the practice. Chris, you use this word a lot, robust. It's a robust practice of it. So when I see people saying, yep, go get in the hot room for that 15 minutes, you're going to get that good sweat on. You might jump in a cold shower and then you're out. I say, wow, what a very convenient Americanized version of sauna that looks a lot like 20 minutes. When in my life, sauna has often been the sort of course of 60, 90, 120 minutes or longer in terms of hours, because the sauna is a process of hot, cold, rest, rehydrate, and repeat. I don't even separate hot and cold in terms of cold plunge and hot sauna. I That's in the word sauna for me. Sauna as a verb and a ritual and a practice, it includes some kind of cooling down and cooling off, whether that's jumping in a snowbank in northern Minnesota in the winter, it's jumping in a cold plunge in your backyard, it's going into a big lake. Heck, it's just, simply standing outside and feeling a cool breeze over you. So your question's important here, Eero, of like, how do you stand? And I want to stand sort of humbly, looking at all these traditions and also saying, hey, there is nuance in Finnish sauna that I actually do want people to experience. There's thought and tradition, and we should get into those details. And at that point, there's the point where people want to learn words and people care about pronunciation. They care about ingredients. I don't teach people the word lolu until they're in the sauna, because lolu is deep and meaningful. But whenever they get in our saunas here in Duluth or in Minneapolis, we're actually teaching them Finnish words. But we haven't named the business that. We've brought it to them in a way that's palatable. And then when they're in there, we're going to say, you know what? Lolu is different than water vapor. It's more than just steam and boiling water over the stove. That's a specific Finnish word to sauna steam, and it means soul and breath and life. When we sauna together, we're living well together. When we throw water on the rocks, we're adding soul to the room. And that's more beautiful. And people buy into that. They're excited by that. So when you talk about that, Eero, I want to sort of say yes to people who are sort of like, I'm interested in hot springs. Go for it. I want to learn about hammam. Awesome. Go to Istanbul. Go to Antakya. Go spend time. I spent a month there in college, and I was blown away by the hospitality of the Turkish people. So like, go to those places, to travel. Be like Chris and go travel to every sauna and hot spring and thermic bathing spot you can find across the globe or across your area. That will do you well. That will be a good way to travel. Um, and I think if more people do that, we're going to have a healthier world. We're going to have less stressed out people. We're going to have people who are committed to knowing their neighbor and being in community.
Well, and in the sauna enthusiast world, and myself included, we've made a mistake of thinking of sauna as just the place, the cedar box that gets to, let's argue about the temp, 180 to 200, We've only thought about it in terms of like these very like kind of scientific principles, but you said the word several times, practice. That's where we should start. People need to be introduced to the practice of sauna. And after they get that down, after they've been shepherded through that, then they'll figure out which space will work for that. Even if they compromise, that, the practice will be driving what it is that they build or buy. And, I've been realizing this in the past few years, like in the Finnish world, it's like they really emphasize the nakedness part, some of them, and I don't as an American, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm missing some of their conception of sauna or the bathing part. Maybe I didn't, because I just kind of learned on my own. So I didn't have someone to kind of shepherd me through the practice. And then as I meet other people that sauna, and it's like you're in there for 20 minutes, but you're never throwing any water on the rocks. There's a disconnect happening between the place and the practice.
Yeah, and especially in America where there's been a proliferation of mediocre sauna,
Mm.
uh, that doesn't breed an environment to learn and be shepherded through a practice, right? To have the majority of saunas in America be in a gym or in a hotel next to a pool and have a large sign on the front that says "Don't throw water on the rocks" creates a lot of confusion and uncertainty and straight up myth and falsehood around most good sauna and most real sauna. People I get asked, like, is that a dry sauna or a wet sauna? That's now a myth that you've heard of because insurance companies didn't think it was wise to throw water on the rocks at a hotel at some point in the 50s, right? And now we're dealt with this like bifurcation where every sauna should be built, every sauna stove that's realistically in a space should be able to have water thrown on those rocks. Now, you don't want to throw pool water on the rocks. That's going to create some bad things, and chlorine in the air, not good. But good fresh water should happen. So I think we're in a world where, to me, the education and the teaching of the practice is part of the way forward. When I
Mm.
look at yoga over the last 10 years, here in the States, maybe 15, 20, why that grew was because a number of people were committed to teaching yoga and teaching yogis to become yogis, to teach rooms how to do the practice of yoga. And now we have this wide breadth of types of yoga and people who practice it for its health benefits and people who practice it for its like deeply impactful spiritual transformational background of it, which is kind of more true to what yoga is and started as in India. And so it's another good sort of cultural practice that came to the States that did get commodified in some areas. There's plenty of spots where you can just go look good and bend a lot and you're doing yoga. But there's other places where they're actually inviting you into something more impactful and deep around movement that I would say is a lot like great sauna. You're sort of coming into a sacred space that has the potential to transform you, not just give you a little bit of a bump in your immune system and your heart being a little healthier that week.
That's so true. So it's like coming back to this thing. So we're talking about nature, we're talking about the community, and we're also talking about compromise. So many people compromise without them knowing that they're compromising. We know about sauna probably more than most people do here in North America, but obviously we're working on it. So we are getting to the end of our show here, I believe, in the final rounds of questions and comments. But I already feel that, Justin, we need to get you back on the show because I feel that we didn't even touch the surface here yet, and I think
Yeah.
we spoke in like an hour already.
My one construction question, I will float this out there because I know Justin's been waiting for it. Where do you stand on drains? And are you promoting them or are you shying people away from them?
Um, it's a funny question and it's a geeky question because I know you guys. Yeah, I mean, to me, you brought it up earlier, Chris, around sort of bathing. So sauna to me is a place where you should be able to bathe. Now, I've grown up in these spaces, right? So I grew up, the first time I was in sauna, I was probably thrown in a bucket on the bottom of the floor in a little tub and, sort of washed. Um, and to me, growing up in this space, you never feel more clean than after you've washed in or after the sauna, right? That your body has both got rid of a lot through sweating it out through its skin and cleaning it off. So to me, when we build, you're always solving for heat, humidity, vapor, and water in the room. And it is, I would say sauna is actually a pretty tough design problem. It's why like we have a lot of poorly built, funky, musty, gross gym saunas in the world. Is because somebody was like, oh, let's slap that together and let's not care about ventilation, let's not care about water. And then you end up with a worst case scenario. And that also is what's sometimes people's introduction to sauna. So for me, drains are essential. It's like one of the things that need to be in there if you're going to do it right and if it's going to last a long time because wood doesn't like being wet and houses and structures and the built environment, the longer it's wet, the quicker it erodes and degrades. And so, in construction building science, it is always a fight against the elements of how do you create a thing that can either shed the water or dry out appropriately through ventilation or airing out. And sound is a tough one because you're getting such high heat and high humidity. And then sometimes in the dressing room, you have a lot of condensation, right? There's a whole lot of kind of geekery around that. So all that to say, Sam, I'm pro drains. I'm like so pro drains that I don't even think it works to not have the drains.
Love it.
Um, so my question is about your floating sauna.
Yeah, let's do it.
I have a few questions. I'd love to see the build. You have two stoves in there, so I'd like to hear about that. How long have you been open first?
Yeah, we're at
floating sauna?
the end of the year here in December. We've been open 2 full weeks to the public. It's been in the water for just about coming up on a month now. And it is this whole project to me has been the biggest creative canvas I've ever got to paint on. And my
Yeah.
medium is sauna, and it's this creative project. And bringing sauna into the public sphere, when in my hometown the only public sauna that had existed for the last 50 years was sort of known to be a place of ill repute, is not a easy thing to enter in. But we've been able to say, look at how beautiful sauna can be. Look at how unique it can be. And one of the most unique sauna experiences I've ever had was going to Finland and getting into this little rowboat with a Finnish man and him rowing my wife out and leaving us on a raft to sauna and swim right on the Baltic. And it was just magic. And that day I told my wife, we could do this. We could do this in Duluth. And that was the day where sauna became the kernel of an idea for a business to me. It was always, up until that important day, it had always been cultural pastime. It had been family heritage and history. It had never been business. But that day I said that could work. And she sort of rolled her eyes and said, sure, honey, and whatever. And now we're literally doing that thing which I dreamt of over a decade ago here on Lake Superior on the harbor and in Duluth. And we're doing it at sort of like a big level. It is heavy and big. It's a public sauna in sort of all the ways. So we built on top of a 36-foot long work barge. That thing with the full structure now weighs about 40,000 pounds. It's a sauna that holds easily 10 people. And to have that amount of space, we put 2 wood stoves in it. So it has 2 really big Iki Finnish wood stoves that they just throw tons of heat into the room.
How many
And
pounds of rocks? How many pounds of rocks is that?
oh my gosh, it's a lot. I think they're 350 pounds per stove. So I think it's like 700 pounds of stone
Nice.
in the actually the stoves. And then fun fact, when you put a thing on the water, making sure it sits level is quite important. You don't want the thing to tip over. And in our work barge, there's sort of a lower deck, so there's in the hull, and we also put stone in there to help ballast us to make sure that everything sits level and nice. And so yeah, we spent I mean, I've been drawing and designing floating saunas for, the better part of 8 years now, since the dream, and then working on it and working on the business. And then over the last few years, we started getting pretty serious about saying, hey, what would it look like to do that? And then we brought this to fruition, and it was such a sprint, but it ended up being around 9 months of going from, I think we should do it this year, to finding the barge, to having the barge open and in the water, which is far too quick. That is a sprint when it comes to designing a thing that needs some types of Coast Guard approval. But we are in a spot now where, we're going to likely be building a number more. So if people have spots that they think would be an amazing spot for a floating sauna, come talk to us. We'd be happy to build you one. We'd be happy to design one with you and talk through how to make that happen. But Chris, it's a joy. We need to have you all up. You guys get an invite. Any upper bench listeners, you get an invite to come join us in Duluth. Multiple saunas on the water, including one of North America's only public floating saunas. Does that cover the bases, Chris? What other questions come up?
Wonderful.
Well, can it move, or is it floating and it pretty much stays there?
Yeah. So it's been a weird winter already, but ice is coming very soon on the Duluth Harbor and in Lake Superior. So our business will run 20 or 12 months a year continuously. And most of the time, it's actually going to live in that one spot. So you'll get to walk out to it from shoreside and then enjoy the sway of the floating sauna. And when the ice goes away, you'll get to swim right off the boat. There's a big jumping platform, like 15 feet up from the water from the top deck. It's just pure joy. It's pure joy. And yet, as you can imagine, there's some regulation with the Coast Guard when you're moving people across water. So currently, our floating sauna does not have propulsion. It is permanently moored. But in the future, I do envision either this floating sauna or another one to be more of a tourable, navigable floating sauna experience. But you want to get through enough hurdles before you do the next crazy thing. And Duluth, Minnesota and Lake Superior, those waves are big on Lake Superior, so we need to build something that would be really trustworthy. And it's harder to take people out. So yeah, we're going to host tons of people every month in there, and it'll be easy and accessible because they'll be able to walk into it right from shore.
Excellent. Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I can't imagine what's going to come, for Duluth. I'm excited to, just follow along. So, and I'm going to give a, big plug to anybody listening. Check out Justin and Cedar and Stone up in Duluth. The social media content is awesome. If you're thinking about building a sauna and you need some good ideas, Justin's got some great ones for you guys.
Thanks so much, Sam. It's been a joy to be here. And yeah, follow along on all the things, whether it's, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We're sort of evangelists around good sauna. Find us on all the platforms and places. And yeah, if anybody's interested in wanting to work with us, whether it's, just supporting you and building a sauna or having us build it, or if you want to join us for an experience, we're trying to open the doors as wide as we can without losing all the heat. That's a joke for you guys who like to, are sauna geeks that need to.
I like that.
That's funny. Thank you so much, Justin. We're gonna get back together way or the other very soon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, guys. Appreciate it. See you soon.